Peter Crooks of Trinity College Dublin. And so Peter is Associate Professor and Senior Lecturer in Medieval History. And his primary research, I suppose, interest is in Ireland in the period 1171 to 1541. And rising from that in the wider English world or Plantagenet Empire, of which Ireland formed an integral part. So Peter has published widely on Irish and British medieval Irish history, and he's founding director of Beyond 2022, which is Ireland's virtual record treasury, an all-Ireland and international collaboration to create a virtual reality reconstruction of the Public Record Office of Ireland and its collections, which were destroyed at the outbreak of the Irish Civil War in 1922. So I'll hand over to Peter now. Thank you.
Thanks, Arlene, and hello, everybody. Very good to be here, and delighted to be contributing to this network. I'm going to try and share my screen now, and after that warm introduction, it'll probably be a disaster, but let me attempt it. Is that now sharing with you? Yeah, and I'll just start by making that big. Arlene, will you shout at any point if what I'm trying to do isn't appearing across?
No, yeah, all good, Peter. Sorry, I was saying yes. I didn't realize I'd muted myself.
Great, no, that's fine.
We're
that's
seeing
fine.
you.
Just
good, thank
you. A little
Yeah.
motivation there. That's fantastic. Okay, well, I'll get going. So, thank you very much indeed. I'm speaking today as a medievalist like Mark, but more specifically as the director of the project that Arlene mentioned, Beyond 2022, which is a project that works at, I guess, the interface of research, public engagement and public history in Ireland and internationally as a collaboration. And also maybe in terms of the interest of this network, bringing in the archival community very heavily within the framework of IIIF and the way we're using IIIF within this project. This is an important year for us because I guess the hint is in the name, Beyond 2022. This is our centenary year. The object of our exercise is to try and reconstruct virtually, but also more than virtually in practice, as much of the collections that were destroyed in the archival disaster of 1922 in Dublin as possible in time for the centenary, which is coming down the tracks rapidly towards me in June this year. And really what I want to give you today is a working case study of materials that we have currently in development and our experience of how IIIF can work in a number of different facets and how onward development with our computer scientist colleagues will see it develop further within our framework. And then I think the potential for collaboration would emerge from that discussion. So that's the general arc of what I'm going to talk about. But to set a context, what you're looking at here is the roof space of a building that no longer exists. It is the record treasury of what was the National Archive of Ireland, the Public Record Office of Ireland, which was destroyed in 1922. You have to imagine a high Victorian, purpose-built archival repository built at the Four Courts in Dublin with ironwork galleries containing records. I think it's about 100,000 linear feet of record space were held in that building, and they were destroyed in the opening engagements of the Irish Civil War. And this is an after picture showing the same ironwork galleries very dramatically, from the collections of the National Library of Ireland. And this project, for a number of years now, 5 years, I think we've been working. What's unique about it is the collaborative structure. Trinity College Library is a core partner, as is the National Archives of Ireland, the successor institution to the one that was destroyed here, as is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, as is the National Archives of the UK, based at Kew in London, as is the Irish Manuscripts Commission, a scholarly all-island group whose mission since 1928 was to recover from this disaster and to publish manuscript sources for Irish history. So this group of 5 came together with researchers in Trinity with the aim of reconstructing, insofar as they could, what had been lost. And since then, the group of participating institutions, archival partners and collaborators has really ramified across Ireland and across Britain, increasingly across America. And we're finding materials very, very widely dispersed across the world. And what we're building, in essence, is a framework in which they can be brought together, their discoverability enhanced, and all this for the centenary of 1922. This part of the building in 1922 survived. This is the good news story, I always say, of 1922. That is the reading room of the Public Record Office. What was destroyed was the repository space that lay behind that gap there. That's a false wall, and there's a gap between this building and the one that lay behind. And if you peer through that breach in the wall, you're peering into the reading room. And this is what the reading room looked like before the fire. They're the two famous archivists, one of whom went up to found the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in 1923. D.A. Chart was his name, and that's Herbert Wood, who was the chief archivist at the time of the fire. And he wrote a catalogue describing the contents that was our key to what had been lost on our way of reconnecting materials. And that, just keep an eye on that reading room here as the before picture. This is the after picture, another from the collection of the National Library, which shows the destructive aftermath of the fire. But the building hadn't been destroyed, and it contained many calendars and indexes and other collections that have proved invaluable across the last 5 years as we've begun to reconstruct what was lost. So I'm now going to jump out to my next slide. And now you're in, hopefully, a virtual reality space. I can move around this a little bit. I won't spend too long here because there may be a lag over Zoom in this case. But what we have built is a virtual reality model of the entire Public Record Office space, the reading room that we were just in a minute ago, and also the space that was destroyed. If I go through here, we should come into the room, and we were looking up at the glass roof a few minutes ago. And this is where the records were held. This is where we are seeking to redeposit back onto the shelves what was lost in 1922. Now, where does IIIF fit in for us? I enjoyed Ben's puzzle that he showed of how IIIF can be used to entertain as well as to inform. And it struck a chord with me because we used to say in the early days of this project that what we faced was a puzzle for how to reconstruct what was lost, but we didn't know how many pieces were in the puzzle, and we didn't have the picture on the box. Well, across the last 5 years, the shape of the puzzle has become much more clarified through the collaborations that we've built. And one thing that was consistent from very early in the project, and I'm so glad that we made the decision, was that the image presentation software and the mode of viewing that we would use would be IIIF enabled. And we also chose the Mirador viewer as our viewer of choice. For the general public, when they enter this in the summer, they will be able to explore these spaces and almost like a curated exhibition, but they'll also be able to see something of the record office itself, the way that it was imagined back in the Victorian era. This should open up in 1 minute, and the record office should split in two, open on its axis. Just give it 1 second to load, like that. And that was how in the 19th century, the deputy keeper who was in charge of this archive schematized their collections, put them back on the shelves so that they could study from the 1860s when the building opened, how the collections grew over time. We have their annual reports, and we have incredibly detailed indexes that survived the fire that tell us where most of these collections were stored. It can be heartbreaking at times because we don't always have the next step, which is the content themselves. But often we do have the content. And when we do, and when we've had digitization performed, IIIF is the means that we have used to view it. And I guess the first point I'm making is that IIIF is flexible enough that we can use it in a number of different layers within the website. This particular one, which is very much aimed at the general public, enables somebody who wants to know more about the collections and sort of move beyond the very abstract way that an archive must feel, somebody, especially a dead archive, what was the size of the collections, how do you imagine it? This enables the user to explore and find materials right back onto the bays and the shelves where they were discovered back in the late 19th century. And if we move in here, we'll end up with the IIIF instance here using Mirador 3, I think. Now, let me just pause on this example a minute. Hopefully it won't lag too much, because a few things about this are useful to observe. And it's one of the affordances of IIIF for us is how it lets us combine materials in a way that is really advantageous to the researcher. This is just one case study within the overall case study that I think is quite useful in this example. So remember, our overall aim is to reconstruct collections that were lost in 1922. And many times what we're finding is other scholars have embarked on that same impulse, that same journey within their own domains, and we can benefit from their experience and experiments. In this example, what you're looking at is a luxury binding, leather binding, that was famous in the late 19th century, that came from the Irish Parliamentary Collection that was stored in the Public Record Office of Ireland. In the 18th century, these leather bindings were made to cover the debates of the journals of the House of Lords and the House of Commons in Ireland at a time when Ireland had its own separate parliament before 1800. And these bindings were, a sign of the status and the opulence of the parliament in the pre-1800 period before the Act of Union. But they were all destroyed in 1922. So how do we have the physical object here? Well, a man called Philip Maddock, based in America, very kindly shared this with us because he had gone back to early 20th century, maybe late 19th century brass rubbings of the bindings, and you can see that displayed here. The rubbings and some photography of the bindings enabled him to, this example here is a black and white photograph, I think it'll come in a minute, enabled him to physically reconstruct as a physical object the leather binding from the parliamentary collection. And through IIIF, we can create 3 layers of material. The reborn digital physical object that Philip Maddock created, the rubbings and the photography all unified in one collection here. That's just one example I wanted to show of how you can remix and reconstruct materials through the affordances of IIIF. Just while you're looking, what you can see on the left-hand side of the Mirador frame, this is our metadata that is being pulled in from our database where all these materials are being collected. It's archival metadata. We use ISID-G as the standard, and it's showing this. We can optimize this, but it's showing the title, the reference code, the scope and content, creation and content dates in this example here. But I want to move from there to some further examples that show even more rich annotation and transcription layers, all within the same IIIF environment. Okay, the collections from the Public Record Office of Ireland were incredibly rich and diverse, going back to the Middle Ages. So in this example here, we have collections from the National Archives UK, TNA, who is a core partner in our project. They have an immense collection of medieval parchment records that are in Latin, which they have digitized and deposited and will be released this summer. And in this case, our approach to these records is to translate them using the TEI XML standard and interlink from the TEI to the IIIF object. I can't show you that working in practice yet over this browser, but you can see the, as Mark was saying earlier, the potential of this kind of digitized material to serve as rich collections for paleographical teaching and manuscript study is obvious, especially when we combine it with other examples from other repositories. But the way we're going to be approaching the publication of this is TEI XML and interlinked with the images. But in other examples, such as this one here, we don't need the TEI XML example because the materials are readily interpretable. Anybody can read this particular example. This now from the Trinity Library, Trinity College Dublin Library. It's a TypeScript, manual type, late 19th century copy made in the Public Record Office of Ireland by a man called Tennyson Groves from a series of records that was of high genealogical interest, the hearth money returns, the hearth money rolls. And he took his own notes in the record office extensively. They survive in multiple repositories, including Trinity, and then sometimes typed them. Now, there's no intellectual impediment here for a member of the general public. They can read that readily. But there is an impediment for the computer. The computer can't read the TypeScript. And so that means that there's a barrier to search. I talked about the metadata layer being pulled into the IIIF earlier on, and you can still see quite rich metadata here, very good scope and content and so on. But all these names that are of genealogical interest are not appearing in the metadata layer. So we've been working with Transcribus for the last 4 or 5 years through Trinity College Dublin Library. And we've created several quite powerful handwriting models for English language texts that run from 17th century up to the 19th century, and also models for early print and manual type to create strong transcription layers which can be presented within the IIIF. I think in this case, if I move to annotations, you'll see, do you see what I did there? I just moved to this section here within Mirador frame, and suddenly the names of the individuals are appearing and the locations in the image it's moving on screen dynamically. That's very powerful. In this case, you might wonder again, why does the user need to know who William O'Doherty is? They can read the TypeScript perfectly well. But if this is a manuscript, we're in a different situation. And much more importantly, in terms of search and discovery, all of these names are discoverable through the search features within the document. So that's the next example I wanted to show. Now we have a case where we have manuscript. And again, to make the point about the flexibility of IIIF. This is an example now from a different core partner. It's from the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. It's an archival object. Again, it has a strong scope and content. It's PRONI D2977 with a long archival hierarchical reference code. But in PRONI, from our research, we know that this Latin document happens to sit alongside a typed translation, which is part of the same file. And again, within IIIF, we have the capacity to present these materials together or separately. There's a lot of flexibility. And what I wanted to show here was how the reference codes, even in archival hierarchy, can be brought in very successfully, so that we have this first reference code here refers to this archival item, which you can see is handwritten. It's a certified copy from the destroyed record office, which happens to survive in Belfast. And this object here, within the same IIIF instance, is the typewritten copy. And the two can be presented together, or the user obviously can open up two and view them side by side and do comparative work. And again, we have the annotation there showing the user the actual text, all of that text being searchable within the overall interface. In this example here, I am moving towards the conclusion, Arlene, you'll be glad to hear. In this example here, what we're seeing is the search facility working within a handwritten object. This is a kind of miraculous survivor of the fire. It's again, a high genealogical interest item, this time from the collections of National Archives Ireland. It's a religious census from 1766, taken across the whole island. Every confession within each parish was enumerated, and several tens of thousands of names were returned to the Parliament in College Green. And 58 of the original records, which were all paper, survived the fire, possibly because they were being used in the reading room rather than in the repository that burned down at the time of the disaster. So they have been conserved, digitized by the National Archives of Ireland, brought across to our project. We've done extensive research on them. We've created an archival hierarchy that links them directly back to what was lost in the PROI. And we've used Transcribus, our AI handwriting model, to transcribe and then verify the transcription. And now we can do the keyword search for this name Brown in IIIF. And all the instances, all the mentions of Brown in the manuscript pop up and are annotated. Now, where we would like to take this in the next phase is to integrate our linked open data, our knowledge graph technologies with IIIF. I think this is really strongly in prospect now. We have built a linked open data infrastructure through the Adapt Centre in Trinity for Irish history, which concentrates in the first instance on people, on places, offices, and organizations. It's grown quite dramatically in the last 3 years. There are areas that are optimized for certain chronological periods, medieval, early modern, and modern. But one of the advantages of this whole approach is that you can interlink with the graph structure between the various subgraphs for medieval, early modern, and modern, and therefore integrate old forms of names and place names and names variants with modern authoritative names. We've, I think, now got about 2.7 million meaningful statements, triples, within the linked open data architecture, including island-wide. Ireland is divided, so that's always a difficulty with island-wide geographical descriptors. They tend to vary north and south, but our modern place name structure takes in the whole island, and we're interlinking medieval people, medieval places with their modern locations. And so you get graphs of this kind, a very simple one that shows the structure of modern county in a hierarchy that that has the name Louth in this example, with the baronies it contains. Now, the power of this very soon, I think, will be that with all this, I'll stop sharing now and come back to Arlene in a minute. With all this linked open data framework powering the search, you'll be able to search much more incisively across the significant scale transcriptions that we have. We'll be able to recognize the entities within those transcriptions for person and place, and we'll be able to store the occurrences of those entities within the knowledge graph, so that the user who's looking for specific individuals or specific places, or wants to find the connections between those, will be brought to the mentions of those individuals within the IIIF framework that we've been looking at. And that the move from the search to the end outcome in terms of encountering the specific mention in the manuscript will be as fluid as one can make it. And I think when we're dealing with, when we had those examples of very, very close reading of manuscript earlier, I suppose the big difference that I'm dealing with is one of scale, where we're dealing with potentially tens of thousands of instances of individuals across millions of words of text. We have to be able to operate with authority at scale as well as with depth. Okay, thank you very much indeed, and I'll hand back to Arlene.